Hey, I'm Rachel.
And I'm Amanda, and this is Beyond a Ballot.
Welcome to the Beyond a Ballot podcast. Today, we continue our series of conversations with women who have led provinces. On this episode, we sit down with Kathleen Wynne, the former Premier of Ontario. Enjoy.
Our guest today is one of the 14 women to have ever held the title of Premier of a province. She was Premier of the largest province of Canada for 5.5 years. She was also the first openly gay woman to ever hold the premiership in Canada and the first ever woman Premier of Ontario. You can probably guess who it is. Kathleen Wynne, the former Premier of Ontario, is here today. Madam Premier, welcome. We are so thrilled to have you.
So thrilled.
Thank you, Amanda and Rachel. It's a pleasure to be with you.
So, for the benefit of our listeners, I have to share that we have some history together.
We do.
I mean, we go way, way back. So, when I had my first ever job in politics, it was as a press secretary for then Education Minister Gerard Kennedy. And shortly thereafter, you were the parliamentary assistant, and we shared offices down the hall from one another. And so we worked together.
We did.
And it was wonderful. And it was during that time that I got to know what a skilled and talented leader you were. But my favorite memory in politics, which I've shared, I think I've actually shared this on the podcast before, but I'm going to share it again. For the 2014 election, we're going way back. And you were running against Andrew Horwath, leader of the NDP, and Tim Hudak, who was leader of the Ontario Conservative Party at the time. And I had a role on that campaign. I don't know. Do you remember this?
I do.
Okay.
I do.
She knows.
I knew this was the story you were going to tell.
She knew.
She called it.
I think it's debate prep we're going to talk about, right?
Exactly. And I was asked to be a part of debate prep and to play the role of Andrea Horwath in debate prep. And the funny part of the story is I hadn't done this before. I had a great time doing it. It was really fun. But for like months leading up to it, we were like pouring over talking points, right? So I had all these NDP talking points stuck in my head. And at the same time, I was also a political commentator for CTV and CBC at the time. And I would be asked questions related to Ontario politics. And the first things that would pop into my head were like NDP talking points. It was so funny. So one of my favorite memories.
You did a great job. But, for anyone who has never been part of debate prep, it is grueling.
Yeah.
It's grueling for everybody. I know it as the candidate, but you played it very well. And I think Tim Murphy played Tim Hudak.
He did.
Right?
That's easy because they're both Tims.
At least they were both Tims.
Actually, it was.
That's exactly who it was.
That's so great.
Such fun memories. So, okay, so I'm going to take you back now.
Can I share a memory?
Oh, yes. You have a memory, Rach?
Yes, I do have a memory. So I actually, as our listeners know, lived in Ontario for quite a long time. You were Premier. I was there the whole time you were Premier. But my consciousness of you as a politician really came through women in politics stuff. I would attend as a young Politico, women in politics events. And I remember one specifically before you were Premier. It was you and Sherry DeNovo, who was an MPP from the NDP.
Yes.
And I remember the two of you co-hosting this event. I didn't know why I was there. I didn't know what I was doing. And I listened to the two of you just rage about politics and why women should be involved and just the challenges that we were facing. I remember thinking, I want to be cool like those two. So I met you years and years ago, actually in person at that event, but that stuck out to me for years. And Sherry DeNovo is somebody that I watched also because of that event. I was so impressed with your ability to rally the room. And we really got excited about women in politics through that. So,
well, that's a great story because the reason we do these things is to bring people into the
Mhm.
energy of the political world, right?
Mhm.
And Sherry and I have done a number of things over the years together, and it's those across party connections can be very powerful, because when you stand in a room of
Mhm.
people and you're not from the same party and yet you get along, it's it's a really important message. So I'm glad you both have good memories. That's wonderful.
So
My work is done here.
exactly. We could just everyone can go home now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
We're going to talk about a lot of memories today. You spent a long time in politics
Mhm.
and in various roles, from school board trustee to cabinet minister to obviously leader of the party to premier. But I want to go way back. How did you decide from the get-go to get into politics? Was there a moment that you can remember where you're like, this is something that I absolutely must do?
Well, I think you know what, I think, Amanda, there were two moments. I think there was a moment when, I was working part time in North Toronto. I was doing mediation work. I was a community mediator. I was a mom. I had three little kids, and
Mhm.
I was a volunteer with the then Toronto Board of Education, and I was really interested in how parents and community members could improve publicly funded education. That was my entree into politics,
Mhm.
period, right? And so I decided in 1994 to run for the school board because I was on some committees. I had come out when I was 37.
Mhm.
Mm.
And so we were navigating equity issues in the Toronto board. And I was part of a group called Education Against Homophobia. So we were trying to move things along. And so that's what propelled me into local politics. But
Mhm.
then there was another moment. I know I lost that election, just say,
Mm.
I lost that one by 72 votes.
Oh.
So that freed me up to continue my activism. But the next year in 1995, Mike Harris was elected. And that
Mhm.
really changed the trajectory of my life, because once Harris was elected, I felt that the social contract between government and the people of Ontario that I'd grown up with — I was born in 1953, so I'd lived through lots of years of progressive conservative government, but never had experienced a government that was so determined on undermining education and healthcare and the
Mhm.
relationship between the province and municipalities. And so it was at that moment when I believe, I started to think, well, I have to continue at this fight. Yes, I'll run for the school board again, but then there was a moment where, in that process, I thought, I think I need to be
Mhm.
where the funding is and where the levers can be pulled, and that was provincial. So there were really those two motivating times for me.
But as a kid, you weren't like a kid who thought to themselves, I think I'm going to be premier one day.
No.
No. Okay.
I would beware of those kids. I am beware. I am wary about those kids. But I was always a bit of a troublemaker. I mean, that I think, Amanda, you've probably heard this story, but my first political action in 1966 was to be part of a group and kind of lead a group of girls at Richmond Hill High
Yes.
School who decided that we should be allowed to wear pants to school,
Yes.
right? And so we were kicked out and we came back, and then I was on all sorts of committees at school. And so um, there was always something to be done, and I grew up in a family where if there was stuff to be done and nobody was stepping up, then you had to step up yourself and do it. My mom and dad were involved in — it was the 60s, and they were involved in kind of the youth scene in Richmond Hill, and were part of creating a youth aid center, a drop-in center for kids who were searching for themselves. So there was lots of that went on in my household. So what we were not, though, was a capital P political family. We didn't
Mhm.
we didn't belong to riding associations or carry party cards or anything. My family mostly voted Liberal, but my mom not always. I don't even know if she always voted for us. She leaned left, so who knows whether there was an NDP vote in there or two. But the reality was that I was always interested in where the power was, where the
Mhm.
dynamic was, and was power being wielded in a fair and equitable way? And it usually wasn't. And so there was always work to be done.
Love that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm weary of the political kids too. I wasn't one of them. I wa-
I shouldn't make a
We
blanket statement
love the
like that, but
political
we love
kids.
the
Come on. They
yeah,
show up. They
we
volunteer.
need we need the political kids.
Yes.
It's just that, when grade 8 kids would ask me, because the grade 8, the pages in the legislature were
Yes.
grade 8 kids. And so year
Mm,
after year, we'd have these conversations when I was a member, when I was an MPP, and when I was the premier. And they would say, did you always know you wanted to be the premier? And I really didn't. And I think that it's more important. Yes, it's great to think politically and it's great to be involved in organized politics, but I think it's even better to be involved in issues and to know what it
mm,
is you want to do and to know why you're interested in politics. What is it that you want to change? What do you want to improve?
Mhm.
Those are the people who I have valued over the years at the political tables.
Okay, so I want to dive into that a little bit because you eventually did become premier, and that
Right.
for the first step towards that is becoming leader of the party. So in 2012 you decided to throw your name in the race to follow Dalton McGuinty, who had been the leader for over a decade at that point.
Mhm.
I think it was no longer than that. He was premier for a decade. He became leader, I think,
Mhm.
in like
I think it was
1996.
1996
Yeah,
he
Mhm.
became
long
leader.
time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the party was under his leadership for a very long time. What
Mhm.
propelled you to say, this is my time? You had already been a minister in his government.
Mhm.
That jump to the leadership is a hard one to
Mhm.
make, and it's a really hard one to make for most women. What was your thought
Mhm.
process on that?
Well, it certainly I didn't frame it as my time.
Mm,
Mhm.
I accept that. I felt that it was important for me to be part of the discussion, part of the debate,
mm,
Mhm.
Amanda can tell you I was not the odds-on favorite to win,
Mhm.
I wasn't expected to win the leadership. But I remember at the time, Jane and I going through the conversation and having the discussion about whether I would do it or not, because
Mhm.
politics is a family affair.
mm.
You can't do it. I don't believe you can do it without the support of family. Either family saying it's okay, go and do it, it's your thing, or in my case, Jane was always very involved.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So we talked about it, and at that time, we were actually in the process of selling our house, and Jane got a cancer
Oh
diagnosis.
no.
So she got a breast cancer diagnosis, and we had to decide as a family
Mm.
what I would do. And what we decided was that if she didn't have to have chemo, if she was just going to have radiation, then we could manage it. But if she had to have chemo, it just wouldn't be possible, because
Wow.
I would not have been able to leave her in that
Mhm.
way. Turned out she only needed radiation, and she came through it because she's really strong.
Mhm.
Mhm.
She came through it in a great way, and in fact the whole time was kind of in the background, supporting my leadership campaign.
Wow.
But that was a very clear delineation for us
Mm.
that we weren't going to do it. So that was one part. And I remember as we were having that conversation, then we found out she was just having radiation, and I was still going back and forth, and she said, so how are you going to feel if you're not part of the debate?
Yeah.
And that was
Mm.
the question that decided me, because I knew that I was going to be sitting on the sidelines, like heckling if I didn't, if I wasn't able to be part of
Oh
the
my
debate.
God.
So I figured I better throw my hat in the ring and take part. And it was a great decision, because I didn't think we were going to win. I thought we had a shot,
Mhm.
but I didn't think it was going to happen. And yet I thought it was important that I was there, to some extent, because there were people saying I shouldn't be there. So there were people who called me, not a lot, but there were people who said Sandra Popatello is running.
Mhm.
She's got the best shot at winning, and this was the line that got me. There should only be one woman in the
Oh.
race.
No.
And I thought,
Oh.
okay, but how many leadership races and how many elections have we had where it's all men?
What?
Many more than one man. I know. So that was one. And then the other one was that I had people within my own close riding association circle who came to me and said, Kathleen, you can't win. And this is because I was a lesbian, you can't be the Premier of Ontario. In other words, you can't win a general election, so you shouldn't run for leader. And I said to them, that is how homophobia works.
Totally.
And I hear what you're saying, and you're dear to me, and I hear it, but I can't take that advice. And so for those two reasons, it was really important to me that I put my name in the race. And I did feel that because I'd been in so many ministries and I'd been in government since 2003, nearly a decade, I felt that I knew government. I felt that I understood it. I felt I had the maturity and the understanding of what was happening in the province, that I had something to contribute and that I could do the job. So I didn't feel like I was applying for a job that I couldn't handle. You never know what it's actually
Yeah.
like until you get there. But I did feel that I had the background and the experience to do the job. So those are the factors that went into my decision.
And then you prove them
Yeah,
all
no
wrong.
kidding. Very
You
wrong.
proved them all wrong. I love that.
Can I just ask
Something that oh yeah, go. Yeah,
at that
go.
point, did you realize how few women in this country had been premier? Because we're doing this series
Yeah.
right now about women that have held the premiership, and it's
Right.
crazy how few there are. I mean, there's currently only one, and in the history of Canada, there's only been 14.
Yeah, and Kate Graham did that
Yeah.
podcast in the book No Second Chances.
Yes.
So the notion that there's only been that many and none of us has been reelected to a majority, right?
Yep.
Yes.
Which is just crazy.
Stunning.
So I didn't have those stats when I was running, but what I did know, Rachel, was nobody in Ontario, no woman had ever been the
Yep.
premier. Like that was enough for me to just think, well, this is not right.
Mhm.
It's just not right, And it's why when we lost government in 2018, sometimes, leaders, premiers, prime ministers, whatever, wait quite a number of years to get their portraits done. But I felt really strongly, because of the number of kids who go through Queen's Park, I want my picture up there with all those guys in their dark suits, because I want little girls and little boys who are coming through to see that it's possible for a woman to be in that role. So
Wow.
yeah, so that was it wasn't the reason I did it, but I was certainly aware of the context.
They're the two things that you've just mentioned, being a woman, being a lesbian, and the first for both in that role,
Mhm.
that comes up time and time again. When you read like your bios or Wikipedia about, it's like in the headline, right? So I was curious when I was looking through some things and wondering about like, what is the coverage and how does it, and that does show up. And I felt like, did you feel that you were really needing to carry the banner on those titles? Like, to be the first is a big deal. So,
Mhm.
and in retrospect, do you feel like that you handled that well? Like there was a lot that was thrown at you in being the first. So I'm curious of your take of that entire time and that thing.
So I was very aware of it.
Mhm.
Even in my maiden speech in 2003, when we were first elected. So obviously I wasn't premier, Dalton was the premier, but I did say in my maiden speech, as they still called it, I guess at that point, that I felt a responsibility to all of my constituents,
Mhm.
but I felt a particular responsibility to young moms, to
Yeah.
young women, and to the queer community.
Yeah.
So I was aware, Amanda, that there were people watching,
Yes.
and who would need me to not speak for them,
Mhm.
but be able to speak with them in a way that maybe previous members had not been able to. And then when I became premier, it was quite remarkable the number of times over those 5.5 years that a grandma would come up to me, or a parent or a kid, and just say, it's so important that you're there. It's important to my child. It's important to me. I remember, going to schools and having kids knowing that their teachers and principals were listening and not necessarily approving, ask me about gay straight alliances, knowing that I would be an ally, and setting that up. So yeah, it became, I would say, really important when I became the premier, but I had no idea that was the case, that would be the case. You just don't know until you're in that position, and all of a sudden the gaze turns on you, and it's important to those people who are watching. And to this day, people from the queer community will say to me, it was a good time when you were the premier. They felt protected in some
Totally.
way.
I get that.
I love that. Let's fast forward a little bit. You win the leadership. You become the premier of Ontario. What was it like in that period of time? Because I remember Dalton McGuinty in Ontario, and he was called, I think, Premier Dad. He was known
Premier
as,
Dad,
yeah. There was this warm, fuzzy feeling around Dalton McGuinty, and like I said, he has such a long history with the Liberal
Yeah.
Party in Ontario.
Yeah. Well, his dad had been a member too, right?
Right.
That's how he got into it.
Yeah, and so succeeding somebody like that is never easy. That has that brand that's been so involved. What was that like taking over for Dalton?
Well, it felt like a big responsibility.
Yeah.
In our in the meeting that he, and I don't know if you remember this, Amanda, I'm not sure where you were, but in the meeting when he gathered us all together. So in 2012, one evening, he called a caucus meeting at 6:00 in the evening, which was weird. Nobody. And when we saw Terry McGuinty, his wife, come into the meeting, we thought, okay, something's up here. And he told us he was leaving, and the press was there. And somebody asked him what he wanted to say to the next leader, and he said something like, "Don't screw it up, don't mess it up." All this stuff we've
No
done.
big deal.
And I carried that with me.
Wow.
Now we were a government that was long in the tooth already. Nobody expected us to win another election. We had a bunch of issues that we were dealing with, not the least of which was gas plants and stuff. So there was stuff going on. But I had a deep respect for Dalton. He's one of the most decent men you'll ever meet, and he gave us opportunities to be ourselves and to say what we needed to say and do the work that we wanted to do in a way that I just respected and tried to emulate when I became the premier. So I would say that it was a huge responsibility, but because I had believed so deeply in what we'd been doing as a government, it didn't feel like I needed to break with him in any kind of harsh way, So that was kind of a blessing and a curse, because if I had disagreed, and clearly, there were things I disagreed with. Don't get me wrong. There were things that I put in my leadership platform that were, different. There was an education bill that I was going to repeal. So there were some things, but fundamentally, I believed in what our government had been doing, and I had been part of that cabinet. So that was a great thing, because I could work to continue that work, but it made it challenging to define myself in policy terms as something new, So it was, it was good that I was a lesbian and I was a woman, because he sure was not queer and he was not a woman. He was kind of the opposite of both of those things. So I distinguished myself in that way.
Yeah.
Right. So it was a challenging time. It was an exciting time. He was nothing but supportive. He was really wonderful in that transition. And all the while I had to put my own stamp on our government. I would say that didn't really happen until the 2014 election, because in 2013, when I became the premier, I was scrambling. We were in a minority government. We didn't know if we were going to get through a budget. So the first thing I had to do, I wasn't even worried about lofty goals. I was worried about, how do I work with either Andrea Horwath or Tim Hudak to get a budget passed.
Right.
And Tim Hudak didn't want to work with us at all. We had a nice conversation, but he wasn't going to support us. And Andrea, we did manage to work together, get a budget passed. And then that year gave me a chance to kind of put a brand on my government. We brought in cap and trade, and we were talking about changes that we were talking about retirement security and things that had not been necessarily on Dalton's agenda. So that was kind of the transition period.
It kind of reminds me of what Kim Campbell was
I was
talking to
just
us.
going to say
Oh,
that.
yeah, right?
Yes,
Because
so much.
she talked about Mulrooney when he left and she took over, that his ratings in the polls were so low. And
Yeah.
at the time when you took over, there was that gas plant scandal that was headline news that was following you from the McGuinty government. What was it?
It followed me to 2018, Rachel.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It followed me
exactly.
right through the whole time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that when people
Yeah.
think about it, they really think of you more, almost more so than Dalton McGuinty, because you wore that policy
Yeah.
through your
Yeah.
term. So I just feel that parallel between you and Kim. Would you say that that's like a fair assessment of?
Yeah, I think about Kim actually, because she she was handed a government, and this is a theme, right?
Mhm.
This
Right.
is a theme for women. They're handed government at a time when the party is saying, well, we might as well try
Right.
this, right? Like, we haven't tried this before, so let's try this. And it's at a time when there isn't a whole lot of hope or aspiration about what comes next. I mean, look at what's happening at the federal level right now.
Mhm.
Yes.
People are casting about who's going to be the next leader, and the first name that came up was Chrystia Freeland.
Mhm.
Yes.
For months, we were talking about Chrystia Freeland, and honestly, it was the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
Well, like maybe this would be enough of a change, right?
Right.
And I'm not going to comment on that situation now because it's shifted, but there is an inclination
Yeah.
to see putting up a woman as a kind of novelty, and maybe people will be interested in this, and it'll be
Mhm.
enough to shed some of the stuff that has come before. So I think that it was a very tough slog for Kim,
Mhm.
and she had the whole country to deal with.
Yeah.
I had the province, and then in the 2014 election, and I also had a year's grace where I could get a budget passed, and that really helped a lot.
Right.
For sure. It's interesting when I think about, we had Kim on and she talked about being, thrust into an election 4 months after becoming leader
Mhm.
of that party. And I think in retrospect, we discussed this idea of if she had just had some time, right? Some time in
Exactly.
the role.
Exactly.
You did get some time. You did win the election.
Yeah.
You did go on to serve for another 4 years until 2018. Tell me, during that time, what are you most proud of during the time as premier?
Mhm.
Oh, there are a lot of things, Amanda.
Mhm.
Um, I'm proud of some of the process things we've talked about. I'm
Mhm.
proud of the integrity of the government. I'm proud that we governed in a way that was not vicious or
Mhm.
really negative. We were constantly working. We didn't sit back and rest on any laurels. Like, we were very, very active. I used to talk about the activist center,
Yes.
that's where I wanted to
Yes.
lead from.
Mm.
So we put money into things that I believed in, and that our government believed in. We joined the cap and trade system that Quebec and California had that market, and we joined that. And I think that was a really good thing. I wish that we were still in that environment. We worked on issues of poverty reduction that were near and dear to my heart, even though I hadn't run on them. I didn't know I was going to have the opportunity to,
Mhm.
for example, introduce a basic income pilot. I'm very proud of that work
Mhm.
because it has allowed a discussion about basic income to continue, because there is that recent example. The previous example of a basic income pilot had been in the 70s.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
so, I think now when we're talking about cost of living and we're talking about the transition from in-person work to technology and the loss of the displacement of jobs because of technology, we're going to have to continue to think about how does basic income fit into this scenario. I was proud that we rebuilt our relationship with the education community.
Yes.
That was my first love, and we worked very hard on equity issues. So creating an anti-racism directorate.
Mhm.
I'm afraid the list is very long of the things that I'm proud
I
of.
love that. I love that the
Yeah,
list is long.
it should be.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
Well, it is, and even up to our last budget, where we had been building, for example, we'd been building childcare spaces in the province, and I was very committed to a universal childcare system.
Mhm.
And in our budget in 2018, we put in a model of childcare we didn't win that election, but the work that was done there, I know for sure, informed the work that the federal government did in putting in the
Mm.
$10 a day childcare, because some of the same people who were involved with our plan were involved with the federal plan. So, none of that work goes to waste when you're committed and you work with the people who really know what's going on in the sector.
Yeah.
And so, so who knows what history will say I accomplished, but I feel that those were things that were very important. I mean, and we had success on the enhancement of the CPP, and that's huge for
Yes,
your generation.
for sure.
We increased the CPP benefit, and that was against all odds with Stephen Harper, but we got it with Trudeau.
When I was in Ontario, I was working in a newsroom when you were premier, and I remember
You shouldn't even tell her. You should probably tell her what newsroom.
I'm never going to mention what newsroom on this podcast. It's too wild. You can all Google.
Now I'm curious.
It was a right-leaning newsroom, but I remember watching you in the newsroom, footage of you, and thinking to myself, it's got to be hard to be her. And I remember one particular day I saw you on TV in the newsroom and later attended an event, and you were giving a speech. And I thought you were so eloquent and well put together, and just you didn't seem tired. You seemed excited still. And I always wondered, you didn't get an easy time from the media in Ontario during your time as premier.
Right.
How did you cope with that? How did you deal every day with getting up and going to the office and continuing to govern a province while the media, especially towards the end, were trying to highlight every scandal, every policy issue that was being debated in their own light?
My favorite question, I'll start at the end and go to the beginning. My favorite question from the media at the end, and they asked it over and over again, was, how does it feel to have so many people hate you?
Oh.
How does it feel to have your numbers so low? And honestly, Rachel, I wanted to say to them, it feels great. Like, what a stupid question.
Totally. Yeah, it feels awesome.
It feels great. Who wouldn't want to get up in the morning and read about how horrible you are in the paper? Like, who wouldn't want that? So anyway, and honestly, some of the young people, particularly young women journalists, when they would stick the mic in my face, they would say quietly, they told me I have to ask this question.
Oh,
right? And I knew that wasn't part of the script. But anyway, I think, and I don't know, Amanda knew me when I was working as an MPP, but I really loved the work.
Yeah.
I really loved the work. I was interested in it. I thought it was a noble pursuit. I thought it was possible to make change. And I'm also an extreme extrovert. So I could be dead tired in the middle of the day and ready to just, drag myself home. And then I would have an event and I would feel fantastic.
Yeah.
Or I'd go canvassing and I would feel terrific. So somehow I got energy from those events, and that kept me going. Jane would always laugh. Oh, just send her out to knock on doors; she'll be fine.
It's true.
So
I can
that
attest
was
to
a
that.
blessing.
Yeah.
Sorry?
I can attest to that. You were really, you had, for as long as I have known you, you've been truly passionate about what you do. And you have brought that enthusiasm to so many rooms that I've been in. And it's intoxicating. It's exciting to be around. And I think that you probably felt in the rooms on many occasions that response of people kind of like buying in and saying like, I want to feel that too. I want to believe that way too. Which brings me to my next. Oh, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Well, and even when there was adversity, even when there was conflict, that it was almost like that was a challenge for me, that I wanted to find a way. And I mean, it wasn't coincidental that I had worked as a community mediator for a decade,
Right.
That I'd worked in conflict resolution. I really believed that in that dynamic of disagreement, there's an energy and there's a way to get through to a better answer. And, when I was Gerard's parliamentary assistant, we didn't always agree,
Right.
and we would go through really heated discussions and I think get to pretty good answers because of that. So I think that was part of what was my skill
Yes,
in the political world.
I agree.
Mm.
One of the things that we talk about a lot on this podcast is the environment, the current climate, especially online and social media,
Yep.
and how kind of ugly it's become, and how that's turning off a lot of women from politics, from following it, from being a part of it, and God forbid for running for it,
Yeah.
because of how
Yeah.
exposed you can be. What is your take on it? Things have changed even since 2018, right? Like it's gotten
Oh yeah.
pretty bad out there. What is your take on it? The why, the if it had been like this, would you have made a different choice? I'm curious about how you feel about it today.
So I don't think I would have made a different choice.
No. Okay.
I think that I would have jumped in anyway, because there was always negativity, and I
Mhm.
think having come out when I was 37, early on I experienced a lot of that negativity. So in
Mm.
1994, when I ran for office as a school board trustee, I had people coming and saying horrible things at all candidates meetings to me.
Like
It
in
was
person?
a bit of
They were
in person. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah. Just, you have no right to be there. You're disgusting. You're just, so all sorts of things right to my face. So, and dropping literature, calling me an extremist lesbian. And so I experienced that early on. And it didn't deter me, but it made me very realistic about what was possible and
mm,
how anger could bring that out in people. I think that right now, we're dealing with a reality that there is a new permission for misogyny. There's a new
yes.
permission for racism.
Mm.
I think that a lot of that started with Donald Trump being elected, but we can't take ourselves completely off the hook because populism, we had a mayor in Toronto who would say all sorts of outrageous things.
Mm,
And we were moving in a direction of less civility in politics already.
Mm.
right.
But I think that the election of Donald Trump really solidified
Yeah.
that direction. And so now we're seeing a lot of that crossing the border. I worry about it. I worry about it a lot. And it's one of the reasons that when people like you call me, or people call me and ask me to come and talk to interns or groups of young people,
Mm.
it's why I'm teaching at U of T. I say yes, because I think it's important that young people have an opportunity to ask somebody who's been through it,
Yes.
who has had protesters camp out on her driveway,
Oh my
and
God.
have union members when there was a corrections strike going on when I was premier, and I would get up in the morning and a number of times there would be a big burly corrections officer standing on the other side of the street yelling at me when I came out the
That's
door.
crazy.
So crazy.
I mean, that's what happened. And nobody ever got violent with me, and we got through it.
Mm.
And it's possible to have those encounters and still carry on, and I think that is the most important message that those of us who've been through it can give to young people, particularly to young women. You can do it if you have people around you to support you. You can do it. And if you don't, and I don't mean one individual, but if as a group you don't step up, then your voices are lost. And
Yes.
then we go back even farther, because we know that you have to be at the table in order for the issues that are important to you and your families and the economy to be heard.
Okay.
Well said.
That's just wild. I can't even
You're holding your head, Rachel.
because I can't imagine being we talk about the online security
Yes.
stuff, but the physical, I've never really thought about that. I mean, we've seen it with other ministers in Ontario too. I mean, I'm thinking of Stephen Lecce, who also had people come to his house and block him in. But it's crazy that there's a difference between the online world and the physical world. And that would really scare me and deter me from politics now that you've said it.
So So let me just say something about that, because yes, it is unacceptable for people to threaten other people physically, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I remember I was running one day just after the election in 2018, and some guy in a pickup truck. I was on my own, of course. I had no detail then.
Right.
And some guy in a pickup truck came to a stop sign and rolled down his window, and I thought, here it goes. And he yelled at me, "Oh, so glad you're out of office," and and I just thought, just keep going, just keep walking,
Mm-hmm.
keep running. But my experience, and I've knocked on thousands and thousands of doors. I've been
Yeah.
in thousands of meetings and all different environments. And there've only been a couple of times when I have felt at all physically afraid.
Hmm.
And the fear came because of the number of people,
Oh,
because it
interesting.
was a huge crowd, and I'm 5'4",
Right.
and I
Well, you're
kind of got
tall.
swallowed up. Right. But in terms of people actually, when you look them in the eye, being threatening at a protest or, wherever,
Mm-hmm.
that's not where I felt afraid. And I've had the experience of walking out into protests, and I would have this conversation with my detail all the time. There was a point, I don't know if you guys remember, when the Black Lives Matters group was gathered in front of the
Yeah.
police chief office,
Mm-hmm.
right? Just south of Queen's Park, and they couldn't get the police chief to come out. It was 2015 or 2016. Couldn't get the police chief to come out, couldn't get the mayor to come out and meet with them. So they came up to Queen's Park, and they were on the front lawn. And my detail was apoplectic. You can't go out there. My staff were like, you can't go out there. And I just said, I am going out. I have been on Queen's Park as a protester. I was protesting Mike Harris.
Interesting.
I know I wasn't going to do anything violent, and they're not going to do anything violent to
Mm.
me. And so I went out. My detail went with me. Michael Koto's a big, black guy. He came with me. Yasser Nakvi, who's not big, he was a guy, and they came out with me, and it was fine.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
People want to be heard,
Yeah.
and what worries me about the online stuff is that it's really hard to indicate to the people online that you are listening.
That's so
There's too
true.
much of it. Some of them aren't people, but the people who
Yeah.
really are in pain and really are angry, the thing I really want to do is have a conversation with
Mm-hmm.
them. Tell me what's going on in your life that you're so angry at me, and that you would call me that vile name when
Mm.
you've never met me. And, I'm old enough to be your grandmother, and
Mm.
we should have a conversation about what's really going on in your life. But you can't do that online. You
Exactly.
Mhm.
actually can do it in a sort of shorthand way, when you meet people face to
Mm-hmm.
face. So
Mm-hmm.
that worries me more than anything. I'm not saying it's not vile. I'm just saying that there is a way. There is a way to think about it, I believe, that makes it more about the other person than it is about me,
Yeah, it's
Okay.
so wise.
I have no way to segue now into the
Oh,
the
oops, I've taken you off script.
no, I
No,
mean,
it's
I
so
think those are really
so
important
interesting.
questions.
Yeah,
Sorry,
absolutely.
important points, and also just something that has been coming up more and more as we're talking about protests around the
Mhm.
world and safety, and
Mhm,
the safety of politicians and female
mhm.
politicians specifically. So I think those are all very important points. But I want to make sure that we get this in, because the 2018 election was a very interesting one. It was a time when the Liberals became the third party in the province
Mhm.
of Ontario. You resigned as premier. I want to just go back a little bit, because you were watching from the premier's office as there was a major shift in leadership on the Conservative side. So the opposition had Patrick Brown in there as the
Mhm.
leader, and he ended up resigning, and a leadership race happened. Doug Ford, who was not in politics, his brother, you referenced, Rob Ford, had been the mayor of Toronto. And he threw his name in the race to be the leader of the Conservatives in Ontario. He ended up winning and becoming your chief opponent in that campaign. Can you talk to me about what
Right.
you were thinking watching everything unfold with the Conservatives at that time, and how you kind of thought about the next campaign while they were going through that, and Doug Ford being kind of the surprise candidate coming in?
Well, we knew it was going to be a ridiculously hard election,
Yes.
no matter who was the leader, right?
Yes.
As somebody said to me afterwards, Kathleen, you shouldn't have won the 2011 election. You certainly shouldn't have won the 2014 election. And there was no way you were going to win the 2018 election.
Right.
Right.
So that's kind of what we were dealing with. We knew in 2016, Rachel, that my numbers were going down. And I had to make a decision then. I had to make a decision 2 years out about what I was going to do. And I decided to stay for two reasons. One, because the numbers showed that I had the greatest possibility of winning and I had the greatest possibility of losing badly. And that's a function of name recognition and familiarity, right? But I also stayed for the Kim Campbell reason. I did not want to hand the next leader. I didn't want to hand the next leader an impossible situation. You know, I'd been given a difficult situation, but it wasn't impossible. But if I had stepped down in 2016 and we had continued to tank, which we probably would have, that leader would have then lost, not having had time to establish himself or herself. And then we would have been in an even more difficult situation. Who knows? Did I make the right decision? I don't know. But the other thing was, I was only 2 years into my first mandate. I had things I wanted to do. And a lot of those things I talked about that I was proud of were things I did in those last 2 years. So I knew we were going into a really difficult election. I also knew, given that Doug Ford was the new leader, that the issues were going to be way, way oversimplified. Patrick Brown was kind of a thinker, and he actually had put out a pretty thoughtful policy platform, which was actually, in terms of climate change and so on, it was closer to us. That's part of the reason he got turfed, was that he was too moderate, right? So I knew they were going to have to go hard right, and I knew it was going to be over the top simplified, because that's how Doug Ford talks. It's how he has talked the whole time. It's, what I didn't know was that it was going to be as dishonest as it was. He won his leadership on, opposing the sex ed curriculum and some really kind of very dangerous policies. And I worried about that, because I knew he was going to follow through, and he did. Even though he's had to retract most of what he did in those first couple of years. So I knew it was going to be a challenge, and I just knew we were such different people, and I didn't think I was going to come out on the winning end of that comparison.
But were you shocked on election night at the fact that you lost the opposition role, that you became the third party?
No, because remember, the week before, I had gone out and made that really, really difficult speech, because we knew we were fighting for even a few seats.
Yeah.
And in that speech, you told voters that you thought you were going to lose, and just asked them for the vote towards the party, right?
Yeah, exactly. And what I was hoping in that scenario was that because I was talking to progressive voters. So my hope was that where there was a fight between the Liberals and the Conservatives, because I knew the NDP was going to, they were going to take some of our support, although interestingly, it was mostly the Conservatives who did. But where it was a fight between the Liberals and the Conservatives, I was trying to say to people, we're not going to win, but we could we could hold them to a minority, or it could be a balance. There could be a balance of power that was held by a progressive party, but I couldn't say that clearly enough. I couldn't say vote for the Liberals where the Liberals can win. I had to be a bit more circumspect than that. But that's what we were trying to do. So no, I wasn't shocked on election night. I was sad, and everybody in the back room was sad, but I wasn't shocked, sadly.
Imagine how that would have played out if it was like 2013 with Christy Clark, where she was the front page of the province was Adrian Dix could kick a dog and still win, and then she won a majority. Imagine if that had happened to you that next morning. That would have been crazy.
Yeah.
So crazy.
Yeah.
we're coming to the end. I feel like we could talk to you for hours and hours, literally hours. But I have one last question, and it's a question that we often ask, and that is, if you have a message for guys listen to our podcast too, but there's a lot of women who listen to our podcast. So if you have a message to women, either women who might be thinking about running or just getting involved or informed about politics, what would it be?
Well, I think it's sort of a message to women in general, because a lot of the things that hold us back or make us feel less than in our day-to-day lives are the same things that hold women back from going into politics. And I guess my message is, well, first of all, it's possible, it's rewarding, and all those things I talked about, they are manageable if you have the right team around you. But I think the more important message is you're good enough. You're good enough to do it. You have the ability. You're smart enough. You will bring so much to the table, because I know that often when women are asked to run or get involved, they will say, well, I'm not sure I've got enough experience, or, I haven't done this, or I haven't done that. I don't know enough people with money, but you do, you do.
Yeah.
People will step up. They'll step up with $5. They'll step up with $10. They will come to you because you are smart enough and you do know enough. And I can't say that strongly enough, because I have experienced for too many years women defeating themselves, and I know it because I experienced it. People will ask me, I've been asked many times, did you ever have imposter syndrome? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's what we live with. And I know men experience the same thing, but I think we experience it in spades. So you're good enough, you look good enough, you're smart enough, go for it. And there will be people who will support you and who will be cheering you on.
Amen.
And that is why I have been a
Amen.
Kathleen Wynne fan for the 2 decades that I have known you. You are wise, you are thoughtful, you are honest, you are inspiring. And I can't tell you how much I've appreciated this conversation today.
Well, thank you for having me. And it's great to meet you, Rachel.
You too.
And I will find out what newsroom you're in somehow. And I appreciate your podcast. Thank you for doing it, both of you.
Thank you. We'll be right back. And that's another episode of the Beyond a Ballot podcast. We'd love to hear from you. If you love our pod, please rate and comment on it on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you find your podcasts. We're back next week with another new episode. We'll speak to you soon.